this idea of an unbiased, non-human, non-judgmental entity that could listen and empathize and remember and talk to you about what you're going through was fascinating. I didn't even think about non-judgment, but it's so obvious after the fact. You're like, yeah, of course, I am hesitant in some cases to share the things that I want to share about because I'm worried what the person's going to think about me. And with AI, you don't have that issue.
I'm Sarah Nagel. I've spent my career leading research and product development within some of the world's largest brands.
And I'm Chad Reynolds. I'm a serial entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Verve.
And this is AI Powered by People.
Each episode will dive into the latest AI developments and talk to an industry leader to help you better understand and utilize AI.
We'll take you inside some of the world's most famous companies and share examples of how AI is improving innovation, consumer engagement, media, and marketing.
No matter what industry you work in, we'll help you navigate one of the biggest disruptions to organizations and people today.
Hey, Chad, how's it going?
Hey, Sarah. I'm doing great. You got me into Dune, first off. I don't know if you knew this about.
No.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah? Dune 1 and 2?
So I split Dune 1 into 2 nights.
Why? Why would you do that?
Well, I just didn't have enough time. It's like 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put the kids, put the girls to bed, worked for a while, and then started around midnight, and I could only get through the first half. But it was pretty great. I'm excited for this weekend.
Because you're going to watch Dune 2?
Dune 2, yeah.
Okay. All right. I can't wait to hear. I won't say anything.
We'll talk about it.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. And then, so since watching all of it, I've been listening. I don't have the attention span for reading, which sounds awful, but I've been listening to the audiobook. It's a little, obviously it's a little bit different, but it's just really interesting because it goes more into depth on some of the things that happen. And I just I didn't want to let it go. I love it so much. I didn't want to let it go. So I was like, okay, now I have to listen to it because I need to keep this in my universe.
I started generating skincare ideas in our AI based off of Dune. So
yes, right? It's the aesthetics are so interesting, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Sold.
Okay.
Sold.
Awesome.
Sorry. Total tangent.
That's amazing. I'm super excited about that. I am.
Yeah, I do listen.
All right. Coming up, we're going to be sharing an interview with Sriram Thodla, who's the CEO and founder of Hypermatter, which is an innovation consulting practice that helps companies understand how to use new tech with human-centered approach. He's also the co-founder of Happi.ai, which is a mental health platform utilizing virtual and conversational AI. And we're going to be spending a lot of time talking to him about that. But first, let's talk about what's in the headlines. I love the Met Gala every year. So the Met Gala happened and there were some incredible looks. Zendaya looked incredible.
Speaking of Dune.
Speaking of Dune.
I think Zune was a Microsoft mistake a long time ago. But
Bad Bunny, Tyla was wearing sand that was a dress. The theme this year was Sleeping Beauty's reawakening fashion, and Garden of Time was the dress code. So it's kind of the intersection of those two themes. But who wasn't there? Katy Perry and Rihanna. They didn't attend, they have in the past. But what did attend was their AI generated looks. It was really cool. It was all over social media about kind of the looks that they were wearing, and people were commenting. But then people were saying, wait a second, Vogue isn't commenting on, on this look, what's going on? And it ended up being AI generated. And they were really, really cool. They were pretty beautiful. Did you check them out?
I did. So the question is, Sarah, what would you wear if you went to the Met Gala? What's your prompt?
What's my prompt? Obviously Dune. Because I think it has to do with a bit of the reawakening fashion. I think I could turn into a dune of sand, but I think it would be something futuristic, and there'd be movement and there'd be some really interesting things, but also it would be putting those prompts in and seeing what comes back. I think that's what's really cool about AI is there's a little bit of that it's Christmas morning, what's going to happen? What's going to come up with? So I think prompts like that. How about you? If you were going to go, what would your prompt be?
Probably come up with something that was a amalgamation of all of the experiences you've been through. I think anything in fashion like starts a conversation. Mm-hmm. So are there different things that are coming through that are like a reflection of the things you've been through to start conversations? That's probably where I would go.
That's pretty deep.
Sorry.
That sounds awesome. We should put it into survey after this.
Yeah. Or I could go a Jared Leto and a rabbit. Let's just do
that. Sounds good. All right. Next up, George Carlin's estate has resolved the lawsuit. So if you remember a while back, we talked about George Carlin. There was a AI-generated 1-hour comedy special created by this podcasters called Dudesy, where they used the comedy of George Carlin over the years and trained an AI to be able to create a comedy special based on him. And the estate obviously was not happy about that. And they just settled the lawsuit for Dudesy to permanently remove the special. And the estate attorney talked about how this is now a blueprint for resolving similar disputes going forward, where an artist or public figure has their rights infringed by AI technology. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I definitely like the results of it because I do feel like it went across the line. So I do like that it's setting some precedent around what is kind of in and out of bounds. Mm-hmm. I think through the episode we had with Adam Dodge, kind of talk through the legal judicial side versus civil. Mm-hmm. So I think this is definitely it's going to be a monetary punishment. Mm-hmm. Right? If you cross the line within these things. So I was satisfied if you ever get satisfied with that type of judgment. So
yeah, me too. I thought, like they put it out there. I think, it got a lot of buzz. I thought it made it, the experiment was interesting. Mm-hmm. But also as soon as you saw it, you're right. You're just like, this is not gonna, this isn't going to be up for that long. This is going to go away and we're going to set up, limitations around this. Chad, what do you think about, the software companies, like Verve? Are they liable for things like this? And, how do you think about this as a founder of a tech company where people may, create images or create content on our platform?
Yeah. So as a software company, we're building a tool. You try your hardest to think through all of the different scenarios that someone might try to hack or gamify to create kind of results that you don't want necessarily to happen. So you do lots of different things from policies and end user agreements to some of the features, to prevent that.
You can't think through everything.
You try to. You try to. And you have to test, like thoroughly go through Q&A and test the results and make sure that you're trying to remove as much as possible from kind of a bad actor, doing kind of what happened. Mm-hmm. But it's almost impossible to prevent kind of humans from making bad choices and decisions from that. And I think in this case, they were using a bunch of different AI tools with the intent to do something with copyrighted material. So I do not think that the software company should be held liable for a person making those choices.
All right. Next up, OpenAI has created a deepfake detector that's used to detect content created by its own image generator, DALL-E, but it's not able to detect, images created on other platforms like Midjourney or Spotify. The detector can correctly identify 98.8% of images created by DALL-E 3. So it's interesting. And, in related news too, TikTok will automatically label AI generated content from, images created on DALL-E. So I think it's interesting that OpenAI put it out there. TikTok is jumping on board. There will be more companies that do that too.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of different than having like a SKU for products, each individual product kind of labeled and numbered. And I think, it's smart to have the same thing for manufactured visuals.
Yep.
So
agreed. Yeah. And I think it would just be, I think it'll be helpful for people to know and kind of like know what's real, like a photograph and know, or what's like art generated by a human hand and what's not. And I think that we'll just see more and more of this, in different media.
Yeah, I mean, I was encouraged, just like as we were starting to go down like NFTs, which kind of went through a crazy hype cycle and crash.
Oh yeah.
But the premise was sound that every visual should have a SKU or an ID to kind of authenticate it of like where it came from. So I think those are interesting, both from like AI generated and also if you're in another tool like Photoshop, generating an image and putting it out to the world from like a publishing standpoint, like give it a code. That makes sense.
Yeah. So there was something that we learned from the NFT world, which is great. Such a strange time. All right. Next up, we're going to be going to our interview with Sriram Thodla. He's a tech expert trained in human-centered design, and we're going to be talking about his work with a company called Happi.ai that has designed a virtual mental health coach named Olivia. Sriram is an awesome person, wonderful human, and excited to talk to him about the intersection of human experiences, AI, and mental health. You ready?
I can't wait to launch sad.ai too. So
sad.ai.
Let's go.
Aww. Hey, Sriram, welcome to the podcast. It's great to see you.
Hey, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
So I think a good place to start is for you to tell us a little bit about yourself, your little bit of background, and also where you are right now and kind of what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in Silicon Valley right now in San Carlos, which is about directly in between San Francisco and San Jose. So bang in the middle of the valley. I've been here for about 10 years now. I grew up in India, lived in New York, Chicago, Boston. So I've kind of bounced around quite a bit, but this is home for the foreseeable future. So I love this place. For all of its craziness, I still like being amongst other people who spend a lot of time thinking about what's next. And that energy is just something that is very hard to replicate. And so I love this place. I love being in tech. I've been in tech for a very long time. I grew up with a computer. My dad's a serial entrepreneur, started 5 companies. His first one was in 1979 in India. There was probably like 3 computers in all of the country, and he happened to be in one of the colleges that had one of them. So long history of being in front of tech and working on tech. And but my first gig was actually in design. I started off in 3D Studio and Adobe Photoshop, and I thought I wanted to go to art school. Ended up going into engineering at Berkeley, and eventually tried to find a way to make it work together, and found design thinking and user-centered design, and did that for my master's, and went into consulting, and then eventually ended up at Samsung, which is where I met Sarah. And we spent a lot of time thinking about how do you think beyond what's immediately next and what's coming up in the future, and how do you think about the future, and how do you define it, and how do you identify some trends and capabilities, and what do you need to build towards it, and what are some of the challenges with it. And I just find that fascinating, thinking about what's next and thinking about it not in these very broad terms, but very specifically, like what can we do to build the future today, is very exciting. So that's what I ended up doing today. And I have a company called Hypermatter. I build AI applications, and I realized that I really enjoy building it with visionaries. So whether you're in a company or whether you're a startup founder, I like the idea of translating this vision into product. And I realized that's where my talents come in, is taking something that seems very broad and generic and then making that into something real. So for the last couple of years, I've been working on building a mental health AI product with a neurosurgeon named Dr. James Doty, who wrote a book called Into the Magic Shop, which is kind of a bestseller. And he has a new book out called Mind Magic. But he wanted to translate his vision of kind of mental health for everyone, accessible through the phone, into reality. And he wanted to do it 5 years ago, but the technology wasn't there. And so when I met him 2.5 years ago, we started building this, and now it's live and it's out, and we have a bunch of users using it. And we're working now with Stanford on how do you help people who are going through chemotherapy using AI. So I like this idea of a human-centric AI solution, not about replacement, but about helping augment your existing staff, or providing solutions where there are gaps in capabilities, or maybe you just can't hire enough people fast enough, and that's where you need some help. But I love that idea of sort of filling in and helping companies kind of do things they couldn't have done before with AI.
So can you tell us a bit about Happi.ai? Like, what was that initial conversation that you guys had when you were starting the company?
It was a 2-page Word document. I remember distinctly saying, it was written by a non-technical person, which is great because what you want is somebody who doesn't care about the technology, right? And they're writing down what basically they want to accomplish, and it was affordable mental health access to everybody through a mobile. I think he had said a mobile app or something like that at the time. It speaks to you with compassion. It speaks to you with empathy. It understands what you're capable, understands your situation and needs, and gives you the right interventions and exercises to help you deal with your daily situational stress and anxiety. That was basically the brief, right? And you can imagine when you read that, if you start unpacking it, there's a lot going on in there, right? What is compassion? What is empathy? What does it mean to have something that listens? How do you want it to relate to you? What do you mean by interventions and exercises? What's the mechanism by which it interacts with you? Is it, so there's just a lot of details that needed to be fleshed out. So I ended up working with him on, actually, I used a lot of my master's in Institute of Design is in product design. So I did a lot of interactive prototypes to flesh out what it was, right? Mm-hmm. Click through prototypes so that, and then we built a pitch deck. I helped him raise $1 million off of that definition of the product definition. We went and built an MVP. We raised another $1.5 million after that. So we were able to go from very broad 2-page Word document to a product through several years, and lots of advisory relationships and feedback from users, and just seeing what was happening in the space as well.
So what is your kind of elevator pitch for Happi.ai and kind of what Olivia does? So, because Olivia, you gave me the demo. Love to hear, like, how do you explain that to people?
Basically, we have a mental health crisis, and there's simply not going to be enough people to address who are trained in mental health to address this crisis. We just don't have enough people trained in this. So there's a huge talent shortfall of the number of people that can be there, available, trained in counseling to support all of those people struggling with it. And the traditional methods today we have are therapy, which is whether it's through BetterHelp and BetterUp, or whether it's through a traditional therapy relationship, they are relatively expensive. And you're still limited by the schedule of the therapist. You're still beholden to them, and maybe you get to see them once a week if you're lucky. If you're a regular, if not, then you have to do it based on their schedule. And so fundamentally, I think the idea with Happi is something that is available to you anywhere, anytime. It is affordable and allows you to share your daily situational stress and anxiety with it, so that it doesn't build up into something much more severe and acute, where you actually need therapeutic intervention. So Happi is not therapy. It's not supposed to replace therapy. It is meant to be an on-the-go complement, kind of like a companion or a counseling or a coach. Call it any one of those words. We've sort of experimented with, I think, a dozen different words for positioning AI, this mental health service in your life. But it is meant to be there so that, if you're stressed if you are really stressed after a drive to work, if you are worried about asking for a raise, if you're having interpersonal issues with somebody at work, if you're having relationship issues, if you're stressed about how to talk to your spouse about something, any one of these everyday things that come up, why wait till you see your therapist? Why not have a place you can talk to, someone or something you can talk to that understands and gives you some help in how to cope with it? So the fundamental idea is not to diagnose and prescribe, but to provide insights and to help people become more resilient in their daily lives. So the goals are very different fundamentally.
Yeah. You said you had an insight around the target user. There was an initial target user, and then you found that there was the user. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. We figured that our initial target customer were going to be females, 25 to 45, that were kind of like the boss bee kind of ladies, right? The ones who are juggling multiple things. They have professional careers, they have families, they have relationships, they have parental, responsibilities, and they just need help. And they need to find a place to go to that they can talk to. Well, it turns out they tend to have a lot of support already, right? They tend to have they tend to be pretty good about keeping social connections. Not everyone, but definitely more so than the men. So what we saw in our user base was actually the people who were using it tended to skew male, and they tended to primarily use Happi because it was non-judgmental, which was another major insight for us, was this idea of an unbiased, non-human, non-judgmental entity that could listen and empathize and remember and talk to you about what you're going through was fascinating. I didn't even think about non-judgment, but it's so obvious after the fact. You're like, yeah, of course, I am hesitant in some cases to share the things that I want to share about because I'm worried what the person's going to think about me. And with AI, you don't have that issue. You don't have that issue in judgment.
Do you think people need therapy or counseling, or are they really seeking friendship?
That's a great question, Chad. Here's what I would say. I think the ultimate goal of these systems should not be to replace any in-person. In fact, I think if we try to replace, we're going to be, if AI, as AI product people, if we are seeking to replace humanity, I think we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And I think we're going to fail at that task, and we're going to fail miserably, and it's going to crash and burn. So I think the expectations are really not about replacing anything you have in your day. It's not replacing human connections that you have today. But most people, I don't know that I would say that everybody has the access to intelligent, insightful, compassionate listening. People who can give them the time of the day anytime they want. I don't know that we all have that. And for those people who don't have access to this kind of willing ear that is not only willing to listen, but willing to provide advice and that is based on science and research and gives you guidance, I think that is remarkably unique. I think companionship and friendship are good, but I don't know that my friends are very good at coping strategies. They may have their own, but what works for them may not work for me. And I often find that as a guy, it's pretty hard to have a conversation about mental health. You're not going to really, I don't find myself really opening up to my friends, and maybe that's my constraint. But unless there's some sense that there's a vulnerability or a shared vulnerability, you don't really tend to volunteer your, fears and your stresses and anxieties.
Yeah.
And so I think there's that plays a role in what I'm willing to share with Happi and Olivia versus what I share with friends, for example.
Yeah, I mean, just as you're talking, I'm just envisioning it's like my journal that talks back to me, just a place to kind of process your thoughts and ideas.
That's fascinating you say that, because one of the things that we actually are building out are gratitude journals. Because I think talking to Olivia is good, but obviously the point of an AI is to do things that you can't otherwise do. So one of the things we are looking at is how can we build an interactive journal? Can I build insights longitudinally that help you steer? Can I alert you, or can I give you prompts or nudges that can change your behavior on a daily basis? Those things are super interesting to me. I've been told a million times to do a gratitude journal. Have I done it? No. I wake up in the morning, my phone's with me, and that's where I move on. And if she was to, if Olivia was to prompt me to have a quick moment, 3 minutes for a gratitude journal entry, hell yeah. And knowing that she remembers it and that she can use that information in later conversations, if I'm feeling down, I love that. Especially now we've built memory into her. When I start a conversation with her and she says, "Hey, how was that thing we talked about last time?" It blows my mind. It sounds so trivial. You're like, yeah, of course, memory. But when an AI remembers a conversation you had and proactively says something to you about the last conversation, I'm telling you, it's a trippy feeling. You're like, whoa, this is weird. Like, you're not just throwing away everything we're talking about. Yeah. You're actually remembering to some extent some of the meaningful conversations. So
yeah, I mean, it seems like you're describing, Olivia is kind of exhibiting these signs of empathy, which I know as a design researcher, you kind of live and die by finding those key moments.
Yeah.
But also communicating some sort of emotional intelligence. And, I could tell just seeing you react to it that you seem really excited about like that component and what's driving that excitement.
The reason I get really excited about AI is that it actually shows me more about humanity. It reveals more about the human than it does about the technology. That's why the conversation about technology is not that interesting to me. It is relevant, it's pertinent, but it's not that interesting. What's more interesting to me is how people react to a digital being like Olivia. What are they willing to share? What are they not willing to share? When do they feel comfortable? When do they not? What are the emotional cues they're looking for that help them feel comfortable? How does she need to respond, or how does she need to look in order to be more effective in her advice? All of these things that are design decisions from a product design point of view, but also from a emotional regulation or emotional responsiveness point of view, her facial expressions. We got, one of the things that we got feedback on early on, I remember 2.5 years ago, was they said, oh, you're going to run into the Uncanny Valley and it's going to be a problem and you're never going to get people to talk to this. And I have to tell you, I told Sarah this earlier, not once has it come up that people are telling me, I don't believe, or it's weird, or it's creepy, or I don't talk to her, right? There may be people who experience that, I'm sure, and just haven't expressed it in the research. But what we do get instead is actually one level further. They go, I don't like the fact that she was smirking at me when I was telling her something painful.
Right.
Okay, that's a very different type of feedback, which is we didn't do a good job of identifying how to respond emotionally for a specific type of input or a specific type of conversation. They've already accepted her, talked to her, and are now judging her as they would a human being in terms of what they would expect a response to be. And to me, that's super exciting when people suspend disbelief, they're willing to share, and then, kids are having conversations with her about lipstick. I mean, it's so strange to me. Like, kids will come up and be like, hey, what lipstick are you wearing? Without any hesitation, without any sense of like, this is Avatar, this is so weird, it's so that, none of that. There is no, when you see them interact with something like Olivia, I think a lot of the preconceived notions about what would prevent people from engaging kind of fly out the window. And then you're on to the actual interesting parts of it, which is how do you design a digital agent, to interact with human beings in a way that is supportive, expressive, helpful, not frustrating. And I think that is a user researcher plus product designers, perfect place, because you're studying human beings, you're building products, but you're essentially trying to imbue them with some level of empathy and compassion and listening through these kinds of mechanisms. Like, for example, I had to define what compassion was. It sounds crazy. You kind of instinctively know what compassion and empathy is, but when you are trying to define a product and an AI product, you're like, what is compassion? What things should it do in order to exhibit compassion? Yeah. Or what things should it do to exhibit empathy? Or how do I convey that I'm listening actively and not just bored or tuning out? How do I make a conversation with Olivia easy to have, even for people who are not extroverted and have a hard time socializing outside? Great questions, and these are super interesting questions to me, and get to the heart of the fact that we are trying to ultimately design a new paradigm of interaction, and we don't have any existing design patterns for it. I was telling Sarah about this. I said, we know how to design a website, we know how to build apps, we have certain flows and user patterns and design. We don't know what to do for digital beings. How do they interact with you? What's the protocol for that? And so in some ways it feels like we're sort of building that as we go along.
Yeah, I mean, I know when as we were developing a new way to do consumer research, we got a lot of pushback very early on of using the phone. People are not going to share who they truly are through their phone. They're not going to do video. They're not going to do any of these things. And we actually found the opposite to be true, is that they were the most authentic forms of themselves when they were saying it out loud, showing and telling, speaking to kind of like a one-on-one type of conversation, except there's not a one on the other side. They were kind of their most authentic selves, and we could pull a lot of insights out of that experience. I'm curious, as you were going through that, what are you seeing as some of those key factors of building trust? Because that was a really big component for kind of our early days as we were getting off the ground. But what are you seeing as some of those building blocks for trust, specifically with how an individual might be interacting with a companion like Olivia?
I think there's a couple of things. I think one is things that, so here's an interesting insight that I had. I think a lot of the reactions and the success of Olivia is going to actually live outside of the app experience itself. So it's the setup to the conversation that is going to matter as much as the conversation itself. And what I mean by that is we need to tell the story of Olivia before you talk to her. Because if you just jump into a conversation with her, you have no context. You know what she's supposed to be based on the fact that she's living in a window that is inside of a mental health app. But other than that, you know nothing about her. So in some ways, we are learning that we need to tell a story about Olivia outside of that app in order to give people some ways to understand how to interact with her in the app. Similarly, when it comes to trust, you start outside and then you build it in, right? So of course, there's some fundamental things that we have to have. We're dealing with people's personal data, right? So we don't store any video or audio. We don't use it for training purposes. We don't do any of that stuff. We do store transcript for a certain amount of time, but we expose that to the user and allow them to delete it if they want to. And we use transcripts primarily to do what you had described earlier, which is the insight journal, because we want to be able to extract specific things from the transcript and use that as a way to guide activities or engagements later on. Now, if the user doesn't want to do that, they can choose to delete it. That's fine. So there's one, which is the basic security that comes with setting up a web service, which is encryption, data siloing, making sure the server-side backends are, all of the nuts and bolts of how to run a secure, server software as a service, right? So there's that. The second is the policies that we have in place to make sure we don't we don't need any more information we're not storing more information than we need. Because one of the things that I did not like seeing was this idea that I'm just going to grab everything and I'm going to keep it because I don't know what I might need it for in the future. We are trying to do the exact opposite, which is what is the minimum set of things we need in order to provide mental health services, because anything more than that is a vulnerability we don't want to deal with, right? And especially given people are revealing some very private things about themselves. So we start securing the web service. We make sure we have a minimum amount of data that we're actually storing, and we give people the transparency to control it. But I think from an Olivia point of view, from an interaction point of view, it's trusting that its memory is a huge deal. Memory is a big, big, big deal. What does she remember about your conversation? Does she remember that you told her something important? Does she recall it? Does she use that information in a meaningful way? Does she remember what you just said? If you end up, early versions of Olivia as we were building up memory, we could tell that there was these moments where people would get extremely frustrated or just dismissive because she didn't remember something that they had told her. And they trusted that she would remember because she is supposed to be this, companion. And I think, so from the outside in, there's the technical things, but I think from a conversational AI digital being design point of view, it's remembering what people told you, being sensitive to how you ask them questions or reflect back on it, and knowing that there's always going to be more work to be done in terms of engendering trust. I think it's listening and making sure that those things are happening. But I think it's easier than you think to get people to engage, because we are now, as you probably can guess, this is 20 years into the digital world we've been living in. We're used to sort of sharing. What we're not used to, and what I found really interesting from a user interaction point of view, we're not used to talking to AI.
Right.
We're not used to that. What was really interesting was people coming in and saying they would treat her like a chat GPT. They would say, what are five ways I can de-stress? That's not actually how we want them to engage with Olivia. Olivia is a conversational agent. People have had up to 30 minutes of conversations with an AI agent about things that are happening in their life. She can hold a long conversation. In fact, she's probably better as she gets to know you more through these long conversations. And so that engenders trust. She's listening to me. She's asking me questions. She remembers what I said. She doesn't make me repeat stuff over and over again, et cetera, et cetera. So
it kind of feels like the partial memory is kind of like, enables trust in a way, because that's how people remember. And it also, it feels like maybe that, enables growth within the human, because they're starting to kind of fill in some of those spaces. Yeah. So it's kind of like you're working together with the AI instead of it being kind of this, assistant that remembers every single thing that you've ever said. It is like the partial memory. So you fit together with,
use that term.
with the AI.
Partial memory. Yeah. It's the imperfections that make her real.
Yeah.
And so partial memory. In fact, when I was designing the memory system, I was talking to the engineers and I said, how do you remember the last conversation you had? Do you remember everything? Do you remember the transcript of your discussion? No, of course not. I mean, we remember specific flashes of insight or things that happen to trigger a specific visual or happen to be emotionally intense. those are the ways that our brain tends to store these slices, right? Our brain, and by the way, this is a fascinating also because I'm working with a neurosurgeon. It's also a fascinating glimpse into human beings, the brain, and how they process, right? Because you're saying to yourself, okay, well, memories are actually stored based on some combination of emotional intensity and relevance and situational context, whatever, right? So based on that, I will store either more or fewer slices of the experience I'm having, right? More samples or fewer samples of it, because my brain is constantly sampling the world and it's storing the parts that are relevant. Which is why when during the pandemic, when you had all these days that seemed to be the same, you had this weird memory lapse because your brain's like, well, they all look the same, they all feel the same. There's no change. You're always at home, so there isn't as much of a difference to store, right? So now I want to replicate that. I want Olivia to have imperfect memory, not perfect memory, because no one has perfect memory. So why should she have perfect memory? Why wouldn't she ask? Why wouldn't she actually emulate some of these capabilities and characteristics? And by doing that, actually, there's some fundamental benefits, right? If I don't have to store your transcript, great. I don't have to worry about security. Not that I don't have to worry about security, but I don't have to feel like there's somewhere sitting in there a transcript of all of your discussions that I just now have to make sure that's extremely safe. Mm-hmm. Because it's not that important to me, because I really just care about the key moments of insight or key moments of expression chat.
So like the partial memory, and you had mentioned, like the Uncanny Valley, there was kind of like that, how close it is to like looking like human, acting like human. Can you offer some of the insights that you have uncovered while designing Olivia? Like, what are some of those moments? You said something about smirking, like, oh, she's smirking a little too much when I'm telling her something sensitive. Can you talk about some of those, those moments? Because it seems kind of like what like animators probably go through the same thing now. So you kind of, you don't reach that uncanny valley. You feel like it's either animated, or really human.
Yeah. It's funny because a lot of the companies working on avatars are actually animators in New Zealand that set up shop for Lord of the Rings. They were all digital effects companies that know storytelling really well. And so they're the ones transitioning into the space. So insights, there's so many decisions. This is where I realized this is an area that I love because, when you make a design decision about what should this character look like, what is our first avatar going to look like? In some ways we're constrained based on what's available and what's possible, but there's also a choice we have. Is this person, initially we had, I think Jim really wanted it to be somebody that looked like him. He wanted his avatar, right? And I think we moved away from that because I think one of the insights is do not try to replicate human beings. Do not try to do that. It is going to fail miserably. It's going to create talk about uncanny valley. That's when you get it. You get it when you take somebody that is real and you try to replicate them in an avatar. Then you go, this is clearly not that person. This is weird. However, if you instantiate or create a brand new entity, then it's great because there's no existing context. You're like, I don't know, this person. This is a character. This is a digital character, and I want to interact with it. So we were able to sort of move past that initial idea of like, let's make him into the avatar because we're using his research anyway. And so kind of makes sense, but bad idea because if it doesn't do a good job of doing it, it actually hurts his brand, his image, the human being. And, and so we don't want it to go there. So we came up with, okay, well then is it a male or a female? Who do we expect to be friendlier to people? Where do we expect, how do we expect people to react to this new character? How, which one would they engage with? Somebody older, somebody younger? We even had some crazy ideas like, should it look like you, but older, like a future version of yourself talking back to you? Because we could do that. We could potentially even take a picture, create an avatar that is you older. Is that helpful? Is that
sounds like a strange relationship?
It's Benjamin Buttons,
right? It's like the Looper, where it comes back to give you the advice on like what's happened in the future,
Yeah.
Or like Marty McFly from Back to the Future. But those are the kinds of choices you have. You have choices to make about a design decision around a character design, and says, who is this character going to be and how do you want to make them more effective? I think we landed on Olivia because of a number of things that we expected our user base to be younger. We didn't want somebody super, old. When I say super, I'm 45, so you can imagine I'm considered super old in my life.
So old.
So, we wanted somebody younger that would appeal to younger people who are more, we expected them to be friendlier to talking to an avatar. We thought our target audience was going to be younger, which they are, but so that's how we ended up picking her. We had to go through a voice selection, what does this voice sound like? And who do we want the voice to be? And I don't think there was any scientific process there. It was more of like, who do we feel like we want to listen to for 10, 15, 20 minutes? And so there was some voice selection there. And so I think a lot of these questions that came up were like, how would I feel? Again, these are the insights about humanity. Am I going to take advice from somebody because they are older than me or younger than me or my same age? Do I have a credibility gap if I pick somebody that looks younger than me? Is there an issue with the voice? And does the voice then convey, she has a New Zealand, Australian accent. Does that change how I perceive her? And why is that? And, does that enable a sense of authority or credibility or not? These are all things that are all design decisions. And to me, they're not that different from like, what color scheme and what color palette do you use? And what's the interaction model? And how do you, is it swiping or is it timeline? Or, these are the design decisions you make when you're building a digital character. And I love it because it brings me back to my 3D modeling days. And, it's sort of like a beautiful circle of like my original 3D models that I created where I had to make all these decisions. And now it feels like I'm back here doing it, but doing it with the power of AI behind it.
Yeah. What have you learned about how people interact with AI like Alexa or Google Home, and how has that influenced the design of Olivia?
Oh my God. Yes. My favorite topic. Okay. So I spent a lot of time looking at this, the competition when I was at Samsung. We were looking at, Alexa had blown up and Google Assistant come out. Siri was not really we weren't looking at Siri at the time because Siri was horrible. And even Apple users knew it at the time. And so it wasn't really something that we were benchmarking against. But we wanted to understand what is it about Alexa and Google and what works, what doesn't. And, I think humanity tends to have these sort of archetypes. We have this assistant archetype, and we are really trying to make this assistant archetype work. For some reason, we want to give everybody an assistant. Okay, we want to make everybody's life easier. We're going to give everybody an assistant, and that's the future, right? So there's this big desire to enable people to get more things done. And I think, Sarah, you probably heard some of this also in your research. There's the same narrative over and over again. I want to just have things happen for me. I don't want to have to do them. I want to anticipate my needs. I think I've heard this a billion times now, right? And especially now when we hear about Humane AI Pin or the Rabbit R1, it's the same trope over and over again. Like, it's so hard to hold my phone, and I just want something that's there, that my hands are free, and woo. And I think there's these mental models and these archetypes that we get stuck in. One of those models was the assistant model. And when we were doing research on Google Assistant and Alexa, it was interesting to see how people reacted with it because it was the first time they were talking to a voice in the home. So that clearly was unique and different. And just, for example, Alexa has a name, Google's didn't. So Alexa was perceived as being Amazon's, Google was perceived as being theirs because it's their assistant and they could name it whatever they wanted. So does it have a name does it have an identity associated with the company that is marketing it versus if I give it a name, it becomes mine and it's my assistant. And how does that, it changed kind of the perception of how personal it is versus how Google it is or how, Amazon it is. I think the other part was around lots of frustration. It was a conversational AI, but I know how bad the NLP systems were back then, and you're talking about things that don't really do a good job. They've gotten much better, but back in the day, it was, pretty poor at detecting multiple voices, interruptions. They would often speak over you, and then you'd have to repeat yourself. They can't hear you when it's a loud house and it's a public, all of those things have been addressed over time with like speech identification and the microphones, beam steering, and all sorts of fun technical and AI based stuff. But it's you get used to shouting commands. Alexa, it's a very stilted way of speaking. Name plus command, name plus command, and it's not the way you talk to anybody else, right? You can go, wife, or child, do your homework, child. It's such a weird way to do, but people.
I'm gonna try it out. I'm gonna try it out tonight. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, let me know if you need a place to sleep. Let me know. And then of course the abuse. The abuse was something I don't know why I take it so personally. I found it very rude. Kids would talk to these digital assistants in a way that you wouldn't want them to talk to anybody, anything. You wouldn't want them to talk to your pet like that. And they were just, this is typically how it would go. Oh, Alexa, she's supposed to be smart, right? Let me try to prove that I'm smarter than her. Number one. So it was always an attempt to try to fool Alexa or fool Google Assistant and get them to do something wrong. Okay. The moment that happened, then it would be, oh, you're so dumb. I thought you were supposed to be smart. I've heard that a million times, right? I thought you were supposed to be smart. You're so dumb. So immediately it was level setting where you belong in the hierarchy of where, are you smarter than me? No, you're not smarter than me. So you're dumber than me, right? And these were kids talking to these commands. And once they did that, they would be extremely dismissive. And not all of them, but you had enough of them that it became like a noticeable thing that people were not saying please and thank you, that they were talking quite dismissively. They would say things like you're stupid without any shame or any sense of propriety. And those things bothered me a lot. As a parent, I'm like, would never want to perpetuate that type of behavior. And maybe it's just me anthropomorphizing. Like, I don't know what it is, but I find that it would be really strange for me to, maybe it's because I grew up with robot, what's his name? Short Circuit. You guys remember Short Circuit back in the day?
Yeah.
I mean, it was like all of these these things have always had some sort of an identity, a personality. And so even if they were machines, it's very hard for me to treat them like they're just machines because we've sort of grown up with this narrative that they're more than that.
I guess, is there any credence to, because it is invisible, you can speak to it like that? I know the first time I gave my parents an Alexa, my mom would sit down next to it to talk to it, to give it, instructions, right? So it's like, I'm like, the whole idea is you can just say it from across the room.
Yeah.
And she still would just go over, sit on the stool, and be like, please play, whatever.
The Alexa stool.
Yeah, the Alexa stool. It was the only reason why you had a stool right there. But it was still helpful to do things. But compare that to, or contrast that to, my kids who were 3, 5, and 8, who just are screaming across the room, mostly dance music requests, but it's a totally different interaction than older
you hit
folks.
it on the head. Exactly. So it is absolutely about how you identify and visualize it, because I think one of the questions we used to get in our first couple of rounds that we were raising is, why not a chatbot? It would have been so much easier to just build a chatbot, right? But a chatbot, if you actually end up using it, again, not the hypotheticals and the theoreticals and the articles that are written about it, but if you actually end up using an avatar-based conversation AI and a chatbot-based conversation AI, you will realize that the qualitative differences are massive. Mm-hmm. In one, you're looking at nothing, typing in commands, and trying to be as brief and succinct as possible.
Right.
In the other, you are basically just talking like you would talk, like we're talking. Right. You are not expected to be perfect. You can ramble. You can go on for a long time. You can see that the entity is paying attention or not paying attention. There's visual feedback and a good, well-designed system. And the kinds of things that people share are so much better than if you had a pure chatbot system. So I think there's something there about invisible versus visible. Can you see something that gives me feedback? I think that's absolutely something that's really interesting about it. The other question that comes up is like, what do you need something that looks like a human? In my mind, I have a spectrum. There's the red blinking dot of hell, and then there's a photorealistic avatar, right? And in the spectrum between red blinking dot and photorealistic, you can actually choose to have an avatar in any of those any point along that spectrum. You can have the Knight Rider, which is just lines, right? You can have her, which is just audio. There's so many ways to instantiate or express intelligence that don't have to involve a full-on avatar. But the reason we went down this path is that when it comes to mental health, we felt like this would be the most friendly face to talk to versus a blinking red dot, which may technically be easier, but doesn't at all convey warmth or listen, it doesn't do any of that stuff. So, and it cues you on all the HAL 2001 vibes.
I mean, obviously you're in like a startup journey. Curious just for you, who is on your happy bench? What are the companions that you would speak to? I mean, I know Olivia's there today, but for you, do you see Olivia changing and transforming? Do you see additional companions being introduced? Like who would you want to speak to?
So when we were thinking about early feature, prioritization, one of the discussions that came up was customization for Olivia, right? It's a very natural thing to talk about or discuss, which is how should we allow users to customize Olivia? And initially we're like, well, we can choose her name, we can choose the face, and kind of like an RPG character creator sort of approach. But for many reasons, we stayed away from that approach, and I'm glad we did, because I think what we have realized is we're not trying to necessarily, and maybe this is a decision we will revisit later on, but we want Olivia to have an identity independent of the user. Olivia has an identity, has a story, has a backstory, has a persona, has a set of interests. She exists independent of this experience of conversation, right? So to do that, we have to actually keep her consistent for everybody so that people identify with her, right? And so what that means is we will be creating new avatars that have different personas and personalities that appeal to a different audience. And they will be a variety of genders and age ranges and ethnicities and etc. The things that you might be able to customize are the language that you can speak to. She already understands like 67 languages, but speaking back needs to be done. It's a little bit more work. So I think there'll be some level of customization, but not too much. And I think when I think about my personal, there are a few people that I personally go to and look at their YouTube videos today, and I wouldn't mind seeing them or a variation of them on the platform. But again, this is the danger. If I try to replicate Morgan Freeman or
Reid Hoffman. Just saying.
we can talk about that, but that was
that was what?
Yeah. It was creepy as hell, man. It was so creepy. I mean, it was so weird. I know technically it's brilliant, but oh my God, I was just looking at that and going, this is why I don't want to replicate human beings. There's something so strange, because you start looking at them, and I started comparing it, and I couldn't pay attention to what he was saying. And then it was the creepy factor of somebody being so egotistical that they want to talk to themselves. And there's all that implied sense of like, really, like you couldn't think of anybody else. You're so in love with yourself that you have to create another version of you to do it. So I don't know that it brought off the reactions that he did. I think technically marvelous, right? Lip sync, generative AI usage, all very good and very interesting. But it's hard to separate the idea that you're looking at two sort of one carbon copy of another, and it's a slightly worse carbon copy, and you're kind of seeing them interact. You're like, this seems somehow dystopian. I can't put my finger on it. I think I was trying to separate the human from the product person, right? In my head.
Yeah.
It's like product wise, extremely, very, very cool. Human wise, I don't know if I would go there. But yeah, but it's great because it brings up all the questions that we always have to, we need to have those discussions anyway. So with Reid and his clone, he's obviously given permission. He's created his own clone. So it feels better. It still feels weird because there was two Reids and they're talking to each other, but it feels better because he did it. And if somebody else had, but similarly, I had somebody said they were going to clone my founder because he has a lot of personal speeches and publicly available discussions. But I can tell you that when they took the clone, they took the data and then put it into ChatGPT and I interact with it, I can tell you that it was a sliver, a fraction, a molecule of the actual person.
Right.
Right? So taking a person's works and translating them and ingesting them into a RAG and into an LLM is a horrible, horrible way to preserve a memory. Because it removes humanity from them and it basically reduces them down to the things they know. And that is not at all who they are, right? So when I was using this ChatGPT version of the founder that I speak to every day, I looked at this thing and went, it's a pale, pale reflection of the person that I actually talk to. And I would never want to say that this is equal to that, ever. And it doesn't make any sense to say that either. So
next time you're on the podcast, it will be the digital versions of Chad and I. So just be prepared.
Well, I just wonder if like in the future, if my my driver's license, I'm an organ donor, am I going to be an AI donor as well? And
I love
just
that
to
idea.
Signal, the pieces of yourself that you give away when you move on.
I love it. I mean, just voice, identity, appearance. Think about the domain knowledge, right? So I'm building a platform called Alpha, which is essentially, think of it as like, what's a good analogy? Dreamweaver for AI. Remember Dreamweaver back in the day? It allowed you to kind of express yourself by building websites. And if you were a flower shop or a pet owner or a pet care owner or whatever, you would build these websites and you would express your business through this entity, right? So Alpha is my company Hypermatter is building a platform called Alpha to allow individuals to store their domain knowledge in a database and allow people to have Q&A and those kinds of things. But I think when you talk about AI donor, appearance, voice, domain knowledge is actually going to be really interesting. Like, how much of my domain knowledge should I give away? And is it free for everybody? And if there are specific things that are constrained, and who gets access to it? And would I love to have access to certain people's domain knowledge? Yeah, absolutely. I think there are interesting implications, but I like the idea of AI donor. I think that's an explicit permission, which I think is missing today. There aren't any explicit permissions.
Yeah, let's go build it.
So, looking at the future, what's next for kind of versions of Olivia? Right now you're in mental health. Where does it go from here?
Yeah. So just to set the stage, my company is Hypermatter. We build AI conversational AI solutions. Happi is one of them, and Olivia is an avatar inside of Happi. So with Happi, I'm working with the founder to continue to build out the business model, and how do we get this into as many hands as possible? How do we get people using it and giving us feedback on it so it can become better? So for example, one of the things that is very clear to me is that the thing that is going to be very important is its ability to be proactive. When Olivia tells me that she wants to schedule a follow-up call with me, I can tell you it's the craziest feeling. I'm like, wait, you can do that? You can set up a follow-up call with me so that I don't have to remember? It blew my mind when she said that the first time around. Now, I know she does not have that capability now, but that's what we're building into her ability is to actually send you a calendar invite. So I think when I think about the future of it, I see so many things. One, Olivia has a set of skills today. We call them actions, but she has actions that represent specific behaviors, right? So she has and so I think we will continue to expand the roster of her behaviors. Things like acknowledgement, affirmation, normalization, active listening, reflection, complex. There's so many of these behavioral conversational techniques we can continue to build out. So that's number one. Number two, we will build out additional personas and drive, breadth there. I think getting further, I think figuring out what is Olivia's role in mental health is going to be very important. Who is she as an individual? And what role does she have in mental health? And why should people talk to her, right? In some ways, we are creating her social persona, her social media presence. And what we want to be very careful about is what do we want her to be and how is it consistent with her existing persona today? How does it go from what she's posting to what she's talking about to what she's reaching out to you about? So that's something that's important. So I think fleshing out that persona aspect is going to be important. And then I think the part that is still elusive, and I don't think we've completely cracked it, is emotional expression using emotions as a feedback loop. Right now, we are able to understand some basic emotions based on some text analysis and voice print analysis. We just know basics. Are you mad? Are you sad? Are you happy? Are you angry? And we use these as ways to tag elements of the speech with heightened emotion states to sort of give us a sense of like, okay, something's happening here that we should pay attention to. But she is not as expressive as I would like her to be. I would love to have more engaging visual, like exactly what Chad's doing. So right now what happens, right? And I told you, Sarah, is that now I'm on the Zoom call, I start looking at people's faces and looking at how they actually acknowledge what I'm saying, right? So Chad's doing the nod and you're smiling and right, exactly. Right here, this behavior is something that I have to figure out, okay, well, what is this? It is acknowledgement plus, so designing this behavior that I see us do all the time. So to the point where it should be a conversation like this, right? Mm-hmm. There's no reason why I couldn't invite Olivia to a Zoom call and have a conversation with her. She's not today. It would be, not as ideal as where we want it to be, but those are the kinds of things I think I'd spend a lot of time building out. But this is true for any product anywhere. Is the ability for this digital entity to be more authentic, more appropriate for its individual purpose, to become more of an expert, treating it like you would treat a student. Like Olivia in some ways is like a student. I'm teaching her all these skills. I'm helping her get better at emoting and communicating. I'm helping her get smarter at mental health. So she's a student that she's learning, and hopefully, she continues to improve over time. So that's kind of the mental model.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to follow along, and we suggest our listeners go over to Happi.ai to check it out. This has been really fun. Thank you so much, Sriram.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
It's been great. That was a great interview with Sriram. That was really fun. I think we could have spoken with him for a really long time about a lot of different things. And I think that, where that passion area is for all of us is around empathy and the human and the interaction with AI and kind of making it feel like people want to use, and participate in these interactions. So I don't know. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of choices designers, engineers have, entrepreneurs have on how they want to express what you want the new user experience to look like. So it's not going to be color of buttons or haptics into it. It's going to be, is it a human interface? Is it a talkable interface? We've mentioned this many, many times on these episodes around the power of saying things out loud and it feeling therapeutic. Mm-hmm. And I think there's going to be a benefit to a lot of these talkable interfaces and ways to interact where they will feel therapeutic. And, I think it's also a bigger opportunity for brands and companies to play a bigger role in that as a byproduct. I think we saw it happening with kind of cause marketing and getting behind sustainability, climate change, all these types of things. And governments weren't necessarily reacting. I'm going down a real big rabbit hole on this one, but governments weren't necessarily reacting at the right rate that citizens were, and so companies tended to step in and champion some of these movements. And I think the groups that are going to use these types of interfaces are going to be companies, and I don't know. It's a unique byproduct or benefit of giving people a way to channel their thoughts and experiences and emotions kind of out loud. And
yeah, I agree. How interesting was it that he had that, initial target group, and he thought it was going to be women. He thought it was going to be people that were comfortable, but turns out it's kind of falls in line with that loneliness epidemic. It's men in their 40s that need.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. I mean, I've been following this for years and years and years of just what's happening.
Yeah. But it was just really interesting because it was a true test. And, they were talking to lots and lots of people, and they, identifying that men in their 40s spend a lot of time in there. And I think you're right. It says a lot that, if there's something there that will listen, interact, and it could be around other things outside of therapy, the things that you love. What if you're a sneakerhead and you want to talk to a company about the shoes that you love, or kind of a brand or something like that? Just feeling like you've been heard.
You belong.
And that you belong. I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of AI Powered by People. The show is produced by Steve Berkowitz and brought to you by Verve. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Tuesday.